Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'm going to be talking about how you can use leading lines the best way possible for your landscape photography and how you can up your composition game right after this. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome into the video. On this channel, we talk landscape photography. So if you're into landscape photography at all, consider subscribing to this channel. Now in this video specifically, I'm gonna be telling you about how you can use leading lines best for landscape photography. Now, if you look at any list on like how you can boost your landscape photography composition, leading lines are always gonna be in there. So I don't wanna use like the same tips as everybody else. I kinda wanna take this in a different direction and tell you exactly how you can use leading lines in different situations so that when you're in the field, you can actually see real life situations on how you can use leading lines and visualize them to make your compositions better. The number one thing I really think we need to hit on is using these correctly, using these compositionally correctly. Now what does that even mean if you're unfamiliar with leading lines? Well, basically leading lines are the lines in a composition that will pull you into a photograph. They're lines that appear naturally in nature and allow you to frame them up so that you are directed towards something. And that's exactly my point. We need to be using these compositionally correct. They have to point towards something. If you're not using leading lines to point directly towards your subject, then you're probably forcing a leading line into a photograph that's not really gonna hold up compositionally. You're not gonna have that base like anchor subject in your photograph. So you really need to work around leading lines and have them in your photography as a purpose. Are they pointing to a lighthouse? Are they pointing to a waterfall? How are you using these leading lines and what are you using them for? Because if you're just throwing them in, then it's not really a full composition. You really need to use them as a complementary subject in your composition to direct people towards your subject matter of your landscape photography. So keep that in mind next time you're out and you're framing up a leading line within your composition. Think to yourself, how does this point towards my subject, or how does this complement my subject? Now, another thing you need to think about with leading lines is how you're using them based on the type of photograph that you're taking. Are you taking a photograph that is landscape view or portrait view? So in another way of saying that, are you using these horizontally or vertically? If you're using them vertically, usually these work best when you have the leading lines either at the top of the frame or at the bottom of the frame. At the top of the frame, they're really going to be like pointing you down towards the subject of the photograph. If you're using them at the bottom of the frame, they're going to be like pulling you directly at the subject of the photograph. I like to use mine a lot on the bottom and really pulling you directly into the photo, but on the top really works great too. You can actually pair these two kinds of things together. If you have a good leading line coming at the bottom and then you have some interesting clouds coming in at the top, then you're working with like a double whammy in your photography and you can really boost the interest level of your composition. Horizontally, how are you using these? Are you using them on the bottom? Well, not so much, because you need to think about how much room you have on the edges of your photo. Usually if you're shooting a horizontal photograph, you have more room on the sides and the edges. So you need to be looking for leading lines on the sides and the edges. Now, does that mean that you can't use a leading line at the top and the bottom? No, not at all. Usually you're gonna find more room and more opportunities on the sides with these. And I like to use these with rocks coming in on the side and really pointing in towards the subject matter of the photograph, whatever that may be. So really think about, are you shooting this horizontally or vertically? And when you really think about that and figure it out, then you can start working with a more creative leading line composition on where that placement might be for your leading lines, and then you can decide where your subject matter placement can also be so that your leading lines complement that subject matter. So it may beg the question, like, what can be used as a leading line? Like, are certain things allowed and some things not? Not at all. Leading lines can literally be anything in nature. They can be natural designs, they can be sand dunes, they can be leaves on the ground, they can be peaks of mountains, they can be rocks on the ground, they can be clouds, they can be waterfalls, they can be just anything, literally anything on the edges of your images that can really pull a viewer into the frame. And it's a really good strategy to use to do that if you can see these objects naturally. So a good practice is when you're out in nature, try to find things that are linear and then try to see if you have subject matter behind it. Because if you start to work with a foreground first, sometimes that can lead you to develop a good composition and help you find subject matter of your photograph so that you can use leading lines accordingly. Also, how do you shoot these things? How do you shoot leading lines? Well, your gear that you're using goes a lot towards that. Specifically, what type of lenses are you using to shoot this? You don't have to use a wide angle lens to shoot leading lines, although they are those dramatic images where you have like warped objects on the corners and the bottom of your frame that help you lead a person into the subject matter of your photograph. They look really good, and wide angles and ultra wide angle lenses really do a good job of that. You can also shoot these like a 50mm lens or a 70-200 like I like to use a lot. You can use these telephoto lenses to use leading lines as well. Like for the example, this photograph that I shot of a road going towards a mountain is a great example of using a leading line that was already in front of me. I just had to pair it up and really compress and stack distances with a 70-200 lens to help me feature that leading line the best way possible. So don't feel like you're constrained to only using a wide angle lens or an ultra wide angle lens. Really feel like you can experiment and practice with other things like a 70-200, even like a drone or a 50mm lens. Usually when you get into the other types of lenses and the other types of gear that other people aren't normally using for leading lines or anything else in photography, you come away with much more interesting and compelling images. So don't feel constrained to a wide angle lens. Also use leading lines with those other types of lenses as well. Hey guys, leading lines are awesome, and I know you're gonna have a lot of fun going out and shooting those and practicing these types of compositions. So if you like this video or you found it useful, hit that thumbs up. Comment below on how you're using your lens selection with leading lines. What are you usually shooting to capture a leading line? Wide angle, telephoto, 50mm, whatever you have. Also, subscribe to this channel if you want more photography tips, because we come out with them all the time. And continuing watching is always an option too. You can watch this playlist on landscape photography tips that you can take out in the field with you next time you go shoot, just like this video.